Good morning, and thank you for joining me on another edition of Healing Moments with Martha. And I am really excited today that I have the privilege of interviewing my friend Nate Larkin, who is from Franklin, Tennessee. I first came to be aware of Nate when I was a member of Christ Community. Just knew he had an unbelievable story of redemption. Did not know what that entailed. And I would sneak up into his class every once in a while because it was always full and overflowing, and was always just met with such grace and humility as I sat and listened to Nate teach and got to know his wife, Allie, a little bit. But today I'd like to welcome Nate. If you're not familiar, he is the founder of Samson Society. He is author of Samson and the Pirate Monks. And I just want to say, this book, OMG, if you have not read this book and you want to understand the impact of sin or pornography or addictions, or you're trying to get a better understanding as a pastor, as a layman, or just an individual, this is a great book to do it in, because I just was so delighted that Nate had written this book. And he is also married to Allie, and he is a father. And so welcome, Nate Larkin. Thank you so much, Nate.
Oh, thank you, Martha. It's a joy, absolute joy. Nice to see your face and hear your voice.
Well, thank you, Nate. I do appreciate that. And I do, I did mean everything I said about sneaking in, because like I said, I had no idea who you were. And I was just beginning on my own journey of what I call emotional sobriety. And so I was just enthralled with all that you had to say. And they were just like drinks of cold water. And I so appreciate you and Allie and your willingness to share today. And so we're going to dive right in.
Okay, great.
So Nate, if you would share a little bit about your background, in particular, like who your parents were and what they did for a living, and the differences between your mom and your dad, if you would.
Oh, okay. Oh, and the differences between my mom and dad, that's not something I often think about or talk about. But yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a Pentecostal preacher. I'm the oldest of 10 kids, so I grew up in a full house, or a house that got a little more full with every passing year. And it was a very, very devout family, very hardworking family. I didn't see a lot of my dad except on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday evening, because he worked a lot. It seemed as though most of the conversations I had with my dad, they weren't really conversations. I heard him talk to me as he was talking to 100 other people. But he definitely was my hero. At least until, the latter stages of my adolescence, when I kind of flipped and started to question and then belittle. And, So my mom was a very efficient homemaker, hardworking mother. The strain of that large family, together with, looking back on it, I know was a highly charged and very legalistic religious atmosphere, and then whatever emotional baggage that she brought with her, all of it proved to be too much for her at one point. And when I was around 8 years old and had 7 younger siblings, she had an emotional breakdown that landed her in a mental hospital. And a year later, on a weekend trip home, she committed suicide in the basement.
I was going to ask you about that, because I know in your book you had mentioned that when your dad or someone in your family told you that your mama died,
it
was kind of left unanswered.
Oh yeah, I wasn't told that she'd committed suicide. I was just told that she had died suddenly and mysteriously. I wasn't told until I think I was 16 that she had committed suicide. And I wasn't told until I was 40 that she had written 3 letters before she died. One of those was written to me, and it was given to me when I was around 40 years old.
Wow, that's a long time waiting.
Yeah, exactly.
Were you able to read those letters, or were you just told
Yeah,
about
yeah. No. I was given the letter when I was 40, and it infuriated me, frankly,
them?
because there were assumptions in the letter. She apologized for being sick and said in the letter that she knew now that she didn't have enough faith to get well.
Oh, how so sad.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so she
Oh,
really felt that the loving thing for her to do for me and for
oh,
my father and for everybody was just to take herself out of the picture.
oh my
Uh,
gosh.
and that's the legacy. I really felt like at that point that it wasn't just mental illness, but it was bad theology that took my
Oh,
mother's life.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It makes you wonder how many people still believe that way.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
something wrong with my faith
Yeah.
because otherwise he would heal me from all of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That is another conversation, right?
Sure.
Oh,
Sure.
my.
Yeah. But
Wow.
the loss of my mother and then the arrival about a year later of a wounded young stepmother left really an emotional void for me, a maternal void.
Mhm.
I was looking for, a female presence of some kind. So when pornography arrived in its primitive form of Playboy magazine, when I was just in early adolescence, I was taken completely by surprise, but I was also very, very vulnerable because here
Mhm.
was a facsimile of a feminine presence that for a moment at least seemed to salve some deep wound.
Mhm.
So I was, every kid encounters porn. Every kid instinctively likes porn because it depicts something that we're wired by God to want.
Mhm.
Uh, so my sexual curiosity was not unusual. The fact that I looked at porn and liked it was not unusual. But um, I was vulnerable to the deep pernicious addictive effect of pornography in a way that some other kids weren't. And
And that would make sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That
and
totally makes
yeah,
sense.
over the years it just went deeper and deeper.
Deeper. Yeah. Did your father ever acknowledge your mother's mental health at all? Or did he blame God as well? Or did he ever talk about it at all?
No, in fact, we didn't grieve. That was another thing. Uh, she was gone, and her pictures came down, and everything got packed away, and we got a new mother, and we didn't talk about her.
Mm.
Um,
So you
the
weren't even actually able to mourn, actually, or
No,
grieve.
no, no. I think there was a
Yeah.
lot of. I think there was a lot of shame. First of all, around the fact that she had committed suicide. There was a lot of shame around the fact that she was mentally ill.
Mhm.
Uh, and then also in our particular religious atmosphere, grief itself was um, really not allowed, certainly not encouraged, and in many ways not allowed.
Right.
Jesus said,
Yeah.
"Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted." But in our world, uh, I have the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. I'm happy all the time. My
Right.
faith, my belief in God is expressed in joy and optimism. So
Hmm.
sadness is a sign of a lack of faith.
Right.
So we're just happy. We didn't. We weren't happy that she was in heaven. We didn't actually even talk about that because I think that in our world there was some doubt about that, given the manner of her death.
Oh, because she committed suicide because she took
Right.
her own life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that terrible doctrine.
Yeah.
That used to be the only unforgivable sin.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, because I think we're about the same age. I grew up with
Yeah.
that whole indoctrination as well, which
Uh
was
huh.
totally wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't have any grace with it at all. Yeah,
Yeah. So it was a
uh,
really, it was a tough thing.
yeah, yeah.
And, emotions, by the way, there was in our world a focus on believing the right things,
Hmm.
making sure that your beliefs governed your feelings. Feelings are
Hmm.
not to be trusted. Feelings are
Right,
barely to be acknowledged. Feelings are
right,
to be governed.
exactly. Yeah,
Um, and so in our world, we were taught what to believe and what to think and what to feel and what not to feel.
right.
All of which leaves you in the end pretty much an emotional cripple,
It does. I would
right?
agree wholeheartedly. Yes,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
does.
emotionally handicapped, not knowing. And so I wind up, years later as this full-blown porn addict slash sex addict. Turns out marriage doesn't solve my porn problem. Porn then takes me places I never intended to go, and
Right.
I'm patronizing prostitutes. I am at that point so angry at myself and in
Mm.
such despair over my inability to control my behavior that I ditched the ministry, my lifelong dream, the family destiny. I leave the ministry and go into business where I have the great misfortune to succeed. So now I've got money, I've got little accountability. I'm still active in church, but um, in those years, I am working as hard as I can. I'm doing irrational things for non-rational reasons, and I'm trying to solve the problem by rational means because those are the only tools I'm given.
Right.
I'm trying to think my way out of this dilemma.
And it doesn't work.
It does not work.
Not
No
work.
amount of insight. No.
No, it does not. I mean, when you were talking about thinking the right thing and doing the right thing and
Sure.
having all the right answers and governing our emotions, because I think we were both taught to even express our emotions. I mean, I can remember one of the first times someone asked me, how do I feel? And I was like, I couldn't put into words because I
Right.
wasn't used to it,
Right.
because that was almost considered disrespectful.
Sure.
How dare
Sure.
you even
Right.
entertain that?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so um, I appreciate you diving into that. And I'm just thankful that we were finally realizing that that's the way we were made. That's the way God designed us.
Yeah.
He had emotions and showed them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with them. So thank you for hitting on that. Um, I think, not I think, I know, when I read your book, I wasn't surprised by anything. I
Mm-hmm.
really, just because of my own story and
Yeah.
being familiar with other stories and just, but I will say the thing that did shock me a little
Uh-huh.
was when you were in seminary and the trip that you took
Yeah.
led by the woman. Can you expound on that a little bit, shed a little bit of light? Because I was thinking this was not a good idea.
Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, in much the same way. This, by the way, this was in the late 70s. This was the same time that top medical schools, in order to, with the idea that they were going to desensitize doctors to, lust in the female form, so they could just look at bodies as bodies.
Mm,
It was
okay.
common practice to take medical students for a porn weekend, to lock them into a room for a weekend and play porn nonstop for hours until porn didn't mean anything, right? So it's no coincidence that years later, I would find myself in many a 12-step meeting for sex addicts, the only guy in the room who wasn't a doctor, right? Uh, so I'm in seminary and I come out of class and struggling with porn. Come out of class one day to see a poster outside the classroom advertising a field trip co-sponsored by the seminary and a group called Women Against Pornography. And they were going to take us into New York City, into Times Square, so that we could see firsthand how women are exploited by the sex business. They're just going to immerse us in the world of porn and commercial sex so that we know. Now, up until this point, porn for me had been glossy men's magazines, Playboy, Penthouse.
Okay.
I had not seen hardcore pornography. I hadn't seen a porn film or a porn video. I got my first look at hardcore porn, the kind of stuff that any unsupervised 12-year-old can find in 2 minutes today on the internet. I saw it for the first time as a married man with my wife sitting beside me in the peep show booth. Allie put the quarter in. Now, what I didn't know was that these moving images are another order of magnitude more powerful than still images. Video, and this, by the way, was before sound. I was just watching. It was a clattering projector behind us. It was a silent 8mm film. But these moving images stimulate a part of the brain, that completely overwhelm that higher portion of the brain where critical thinking takes place and moral judgments are made. And it stimulates a more primitive part of the brain that cannot distinguish between actual experience and virtual experience. It's immersive. That's why film is so powerful.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
it appeals more to the senses and feelings, would you say? Is that correct or not?
Yeah, and it is a deeper and more visceral experience than, So it connected very, very deeply. And all I knew was that within days I was leaving seminary and leaving home, and driving down into the seedier parts of Trenton, New Jersey in search of a source for this new drug, because I had found an amazing drug. Yeah.
And I can remember reading in your book, and this goes with, I think, any sin that becomes a habit or an addiction, okay, anything. The justification was that I'm not hurting anybody.
Oh, sure.
I'm not having an affair.
Right.
Blah, 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 blah. And that whole narrative that is ultimately a lie, but you were being hurt and you just didn't realize it. And so at what point did that become a realization that you were the one being hurt?
Yeah, well, and I wasn't the only one being hurt.
Right, you weren't. Right.
Because Allie could see me drifting away from her emotionally.
Yeah.
She had no explanation. The truth is that because these are such immersive experiences, I was bonding emotionally with phantoms. And that harmed my connection with my wife. It also, I was starting to condition my brain toward novelty when it comes to sex.
Okay.
So now I had a buffet of potential sex partners, new ones at every opportunity, and never knew, what might be offered to me when I walked through the door of yet another adult bookstore, which was how I accessed pornography back then. Never brought it home. And this actually was before VHS. So I got to see all that happen. I got to see porn go to videotapes and then into video stores and video rentals, and now you can bring it home. That really changed things. And then the arrival of the internet, and then broadband internet. When it goes from, in the beginning on internet, I'm just watching still images crawl down the screen. I'm waiting forever for those to happen. And then eventually now I have got full motion video. I have an endless supply. I have an endless variety of virtual sex partners. Now my brain is conditioned to novelty. And once novelty becomes an essential part of my arousal template, thank God for healing. Thank God that God gave us a self-healing brain. But during those years when I was so sick, when my arousal template is set to the point where sex becomes entwined with novelty, then it doesn't matter how beautiful my wife is. She's only one woman. She can never be enough, and I can never be satisfied, and we can never connect. And I am forever now in this desperate need. And you know, the sad thing about pornography when I was consuming it on a daily basis is I was driven by this deep hunger that I didn't understand. But every indulgence left me hungrier.
As with any addiction.
Right. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
start out with a little bit, and then that's not enough to get the thrill, and then it has to eventually increase. Whether
Right.
it's
Right.
addiction to exercise, working out,
Yeah.
eating chocolate, I
Right.
don't care.
And
It's
on
just
top
it's not enough. Right.
on top of it all is the shame, because
Right.
I'm still very much a devout Christian. I'm going to church every Sunday. I'm active in church. I'm not a pastor anymore, but I am a very active layman. And but porn is something that we don't talk about in church.
No.
If it's
Oh, we
ever
don't even talk
mentioned,
about sex.
that's
Are
right.
you kidding me?
If it is mentioned,
Right.
it's in the most shameful of tones. And if anybody is caught, or if, God forbid, some poor sucker takes our rhetoric about grace at face value and actually confesses a sexual sin, we land on him with all 4 feet. The sirens go off because now, you know, it's our obligation to get the sinner out of the church.
Right.
Right.
Right. Exactly. Right.
All our Pharisaism kicks in. And irony of ironies, I participated in the stoning of other people.
Yeah.
Thinking, I think, at the time that I was teaching myself a lesson, or maybe, you know, maybe now I wouldn't do it. I spent a long time trying to shame my way out of shame-based behavior, and it never worked.
And that's actually my next question. Too, is that just because of shame? I mean, Brene Brown has written so much about that and the power. And I'm convinced personally that it is probably the number one or one of the top weapons that the evil one uses against us.
Sure, right.
Because if you don't bring it into the light, you can't have healing, keep us in our shame, and there we are.
Right.
But how did you move past the shame? And when you came to light with all that was going on, the prostitutes of pornography, the hundreds of thousands of dollars spent, and then how did you move past the shame of sharing all of that with your family?
I had to first find a shame-free environment. And ironically, I found it in church. However, not when church was in session.
Okay.
It wasn't upstairs on a Sunday. It was in the basement of the church in the middle of the week with a bunch of other broken people. It was in a 12-step room. And I remember sitting in that circle and hearing other people tell my story. And having the sensation of never in my life having been in a room that safe. I had never felt, but first of all, I'd never seen or experienced such vulnerability, such transparency. I'd never felt such empathy. And when I could summon the courage to begin to say, to utter some of the more shameful things about me, to admit some of the things I had done and felt, to see that people moved toward me instead of away. That was brand new. The message that I had internalized was that if I was going to be a Christian, and if I was going to be of any help to anyone, if I was ever going to be of any value in ministry, if I was going to have any, redemptive value in this world, then I had to be bright and shiny. I had to get my act together. I had to have answers. I had to project success, and I had to give other tips, other people, workable tips and techniques for how to succeed. But I had to be an example of godliness. That actually never made me any friends, and I don't think it led to lasting success in ministry. the church I planted, for example, during my 5 years in ministry, didn't survive more than 18 months after I quit because it was built on the Nate Larkin show, right?
Gotcha.
Which
Yeah.
which was a
Instead of the
sham.
gospel. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
which was a sham. And I didn't have deep relationships with anybody. I couldn't ever allow anybody to get too close because they might see who I really was.
Sure. Yeah.
So they got to see a religious version of me
Yeah.
that they aspired to emulate, an aspiration that was doomed to failure because I couldn't even live up to my own image.
Yeah. We can't. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what I found was that when I came out of hiding and started to show people who I really am, people didn't run away. That somehow, strangely, was magnetic. Suddenly, I'm safer now.
Mm-hmm.
People started telling me things they never told me when I was a bright and shiny pastor.
Yes. Right. And
Uh,
they won't,
yeah.
because there's this appearance of godliness or holiness that they're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't possibly share what I'm struggling with because there's just I can't and I can't ever possibly attain to that level of holiness that obviously, the appearance has led to. And you're right. Yeah.
I got plenty of affirmation during my years as a pastor. And I was never caught, by the way, by the public. I was eventually caught by my wife. Thank God. That saved my life.
Yes.
All the affirmation, all the pats on the back, all the love that I got from folks, which was sincere on their part, didn't mean anything to me because I knew I was a fraud.
Mm.
The acceptance that I get today means something.
Yeah.
Because I know people see the real me.
Right. Yeah. The whole mask does not work for very long. It doesn't.
I was well known during those years, but nobody knew me. I had tons of friends, but the friendship, and I didn't trust the friendship.
True friends, authentic friends.
Yeah. Today, I got to tell you, I've got friendships that mean the world to me. And, miracle of miracles, my marriage has not only survived, it has thrived, and it has become, my friendship with Allie has deepened to the point where, I can't imagine life without her. And I can see her beauty and she can see mine, and we don't have to perform for each other. We carry each other through this life. So.
Well, I admire your relationship with Allie so much. And when I was reading about what she did about, I'm not going to divorce you, but this is not going to continue.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this and you can do this over here. And I hope, you make a wise decision kind of. And I was like, wow, such tenacity on her part. And I love that. And it was just, and I think in that a point, it seemed to be that was a point where God was like, okay, I'm on Allie. This story needs to change, and it's changing now.
Yeah.
I know. So what did that look like when you started into the 12 steps, and what did that look like for you? Because then I know when I started 12 step, I did ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, and it was such a foreign idea to my family. They were like, why are you doing a 12 step? And what the heck have you just joined? So what was your family's response?
Oh, I'm sure skepticism. We in the world that I grew up in, we poisoned the well against 12-step recovery on a regular basis, right? There's no 12 steps. There's one step. It's surrender to God, and we had a nice, But I got to tell you, I smelled the gospel from the moment I walked into the room. And amazingly, my Christian faith, outwardly, I was still a Christian. Aspirationally, I was still a Christian. I was still going through the motions, but practically my faith was on life support. Addiction had all but snuffed it out. I had kind of reached the conclusion that, after screaming at God and begging him to take this addiction away, only to be left apparently with indifference. He didn't answer that question. He didn't answer that request with the solution I wanted. I wanted a private solution to my private problem, and he refused to deliver. I
was
conclude,
sneaky that way, right?
yeah. So I had pretty much concluded that either he didn't care or he didn't exist.
Right.
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 I
hear you.
I preferred to believe that he didn't care. Right.
Right.
Strangely, I wind up with this bunch of Samaritans, these losers in the basement of the church who don't even seem to know God's proper name. They keep referring to him as a higher power. Meanwhile, I know that my higher power can beat up their higher power. I've got this real sense, still residual sense of, spiritual superiority. Where was I going? I had a long and convoluted sentence that was going somewhere, and it derailed at some point. Well, here's the strange thing. That 12-step experience began to open doors and windows on the gospel that I had never seen. The Bible changed. Mm-hmm. There is a figure of speech in 12-step recovery that says we get a new pair of glasses.
We do.
And suddenly it's I got a new pair of glasses, and the Bible changed. The gospel came into focus in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, because 12 steps is the gospel.
Yeah.
I mean, in all practical forms, I should say.
Yeah, it certainly was a valuable corrective for me.
Yeah.
And a spiritual life that was all but moribund, came alive again in very unexpected ways.
And in your book, and I'm thinking this would be a great Bible study for you to write, is put out there for all of us to have access to, was the interesting comparison between Samson and David.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And I read that and I had so many aha moments.
Yeah.
And we both have, because of being involved in 12 steps, we know that community is where it happens.
Right, sure.
And that's where healing happens on all different levels and all of that. But tell our audience about, as you studied Samson and David, the findings, well, what you found out.
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing is that they're both heroic figures. They're both major Old Testament figures. Both of them really had kind of messianic missions. They were sent by God to deliver Israel from the tyranny of the Philistines. The first one was Samson, whose death was actually announced by an angel, first to his mother and then to his father. David, however, and Samson did outsized, heroic things. I mean, just unbelievable things. Nobody can match Samson for courage, for feats of strength. I mean, who kills 1,000 Philistines in one day? Right. Who catches 300 foxes? Who does that?
Right. Samson.
That's right. And Samson went out of his way to pick fights with the Philistines. And he was actually the leader of Israel. He was judge of Israel. He was, he was the leader in all matters, civil, military, and religious for 20 years. In all those times, as far as we know, never failed in his professional duties. But he had this secret life. He went off the reservation after 5 o'clock every night. And he was such a freaking loner, Samson was. Samson was the strongest guy he knew. Samson didn't have friends. Samson really didn't feel that he needed friends. He was the guy who wanted the ball at the end of the game. And Samson died alone, and he died a failure. Then along comes David, who also, he does amazing things. A little bit different from Samson. Samson made his reputation by killing 1,000 Philistines in one day. David made his reputation by killing one, but David killed the right one, right?
Right.
So the interesting thing about the two is that both men suffered collapses at about the same age, about the age of 40. Both of them collapsed. A woman was involved in both cases. With Samson, it was Delilah. With David, it was Bathsheba. But David actually recovered and went on to become a better man and a better king. Yeah. Samson never did. Samson died alone among his enemies. Samson died a failure. David actually went on to deliver Israel and establish the free and independent state of Israel, defeat the Philistines, and and establish a legacy. And I think the difference between the two lies in what they had learned to do. I think David recovered because he'd learned to do the things that make recovery possible, and Samson had never learned to do those things. I think key for David was his friendship with Jonathan. That's really what turned the tables for David. That was his first great friendship. It was an unlikely friendship. And it was a friendship that was established by Jonathan on the basis of vulnerability. So the Bible actually paints the picture of what happened that day. So here's David. He's just killed Goliath. The giant is headless on the ground. David is surrounded by jubilant Israelites, high-fived by everybody. It's very clear that he is the hope of Israel. Meanwhile, off to the side stands Jonathan, next in line for the throne. He's the crown prince. If he has any political sense, he sees that David is now his rival, and if he is going to have a future, he had better find a way to isolate and eliminate David. But Jonathan doesn't do that. Instead, Jonathan approaches David, and he does an amazing thing. He does this vulnerability thing. He approaches David, and he takes off. The first thing he does is he takes off his armor. That is to say, first thing he does is he gives him his sword, something David, and he takes his bow and his arrow and his knife. It gives all of his weapons to David, things that David can hurt him with. Then he takes off his armor, which is to say his defenses, and he gives those to David. And then on the basis of that vulnerability, he offers a friendship. That friendship becomes the first of many for David. It's striking that in all the Bible tells us about Samson, it doesn't give us the name of a single friend. In fact, the only associates of Samson's that are mentioned, other than his parents, the only one is Delilah, the woman who betrays him. In the Bible, the names of David's friends go on for pages.
Mm-hmm. They do.
See, he has his 300, he has his 30, he has his 3. David surrounds himself by losers, by desperados, and by heroes, by giant killers greater than himself. And together, they accomplish what no man ever could have done. Together, they defeat the Philistines. It was from the time I was a child and learned the story of Samson, I always wanted to be Samson. And there came a day in my life when I had to face the fact that my childhood dream had become true. I had become Samson in a way. I'd done some extraordinary things, but it was over. I was alone. And if I was going to have any chance for recovery, I first had to admit I was Samson. And then somehow I was going to have to find somebody who could teach me how to live like David.
I love the quote in your book, and I was just looking for it. I could see all the tabs that I've got, but I can't put my hands on it. But your quote was something to the effect of, "Alone and isolated, you're this, but together with the band of pirate monks, you can accomplish much more than you could ever have imagined possible." Can you
Yeah.
share that quote with me more accurately?
Well, yeah, no, I don't remember the quote, but I do know that, here's what I had been misinformed about the nature of the Christian faith. I'd had a personal relationship with Jesus since I was, you know, a kid getting saved every summer.
Mm-hmm.
But I had interpreted that private, that personal relationship to be a private one, and had spent my life begging God for a private solution to my private problem. As it turns out, I am a colossal failure as a solo disciple, for the very simple reason that Jesus doesn't have any solo disciples. He doesn't want any solo disciples. That has never been the plan. He came to reconcile us to the Father and to each other. He came to reconstitute the family of God. We can only follow him together. He first said, "Follow me to two guys, not just one." And then spent a couple years, then added 10 more and spent a couple years having those guys follow him around while he taught them that the most important thing was that they love each other. So, the Christian life, this is a team sport, not an individual event. And if there is, I'm grateful now for my experience with addiction, because it's only the futility of trying to overcome an addiction that gave me, in the end, the gift of desperation. The willingness to surrender my ambition to be like God, self-sufficient. I said during all those years when I was trying to break free that I wanted, sobriety, that I wanted purity, that I wanted godliness. No, what I really wanted was moral self-sufficiency. I didn't want to need anybody, partly because I didn't believe it was safe to need anybody. I didn't want
I get
to
that.
need anybody, right?
Right.
So safety was in self-sufficiency.
Right.
So I thought.
Well, and
There is no safety in self-sufficiency. Only God is self-sufficient. We were designed to be interdependent. And God somehow had to find a way to maneuver me to a point where I'd be willing enough, desperate enough to actually allow someone else to help me.
right. I agree. I mean, I spent 20 years isolating myself.
Yeah.
I did it really well. And I isolated because of the shame that had been heaped upon me because I chose to divorce my ex-husband.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was the women, the shame on me. And it doesn't work. That
Right.
isolation, and you're right, it starts out, well, because you can't trust anybody because whatever. And I'm just thankful for people like Mary Thompson Johns, who spoke truth in my life, and then hearing the stories from our mutual friend David Hampton, and realizing that it's in community is where we are hurt, and we also have to heal in community because that's what we're designed for.
Right.
We were not designed for that Lone Ranger mentality that we often so affiliate with Christianity. Oh, let me go do this wonderful thing for Jesus, or whatever it is we have on our agenda.
Yeah.
And I'll do it all by myself. And Jesus is like, no, we're not going to do it that way.
No, we're not.
And I'm so
we're
thankful. Yeah.
We're not parts of an organization. We're members of an organism, right?
Right. We
a
are.
living, breathing thing that, we're so closely connected, we can only move together.
Right.
Yeah.
You are ever so correct. So now you have we're moving a little forward. You have started Samson Society.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what does that look like now? And
Yeah.
well, the other question, other part of that is, and is it? Well, I want to talk about women and
Oh, yeah.
addictions for just a minute, but after you answer that question. So,
Yeah. Well, Samson Society is it's a mutual aid society for Christian men. It's born out of my experience in 12-step recovery. But as I began to share my story with other guys, I found, first of all, that some Christian guys found it difficult. I'm a natural translator. It's what I do for a living. And I could see the gospel very clearly in 12-step literature, even if, the Christian language wasn't explicit.
right.
I found some other Christian guys had a hard time making the leap. They wanted to be able to more clearly integrate their Christian faith with their recovery experience. Also, I found that not everybody, first of all, not everybody's a sex addict. So, and I began to suspect that we didn't need to segregate by sin, that really we addicts kind of share an inner architecture. I found that I could get a lot of help from an alcoholic or a food addict or a gambling addict. It was a revelation to me when my first sponsor told me that my biggest problem was that I thought that sex was my problem. And he said, it's a problem. It's a big problem. You have to stop. You can't stop on your own. God's going to have to do it. He's probably going to use us in the process. But if you think that just stopping that behavior is going to fix you and make you happy, you're crazy, because sex isn't your problem. Sex is your favorite solution. It is the medication that you've been using all these years to numb the pain caused by your deeper problems, which, by the way, are common to man. So if we spend our time on the deeper issues, on the wounds, on what needs to be healed and what needs to be repented of, it turns out I had far more healing and still do, far more healing and far more repenting to do than I realized. It's not just sin management. It's not just about, if all I do is control this behavior, if I restrict my recognition of sin, my definition of sin, to a narrow spectrum, then I'm well on my way to becoming a Pharisee, thinking that because I am not doing that, I'm somehow, I've reached some.
At least I'm not doing this.
Yeah, I've reached some pinnacle of spirituality, and I am not like other men. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So Samson Society is not a 12-step group, but it carries the spirit of 12-step recovery. There are some crucial differences between a Samson meeting and a typical 12-step meeting. We open in prayer. There's a scripture reading. We have a confession of faith, a simple confession of faith that gets read at every meeting. But the Samson Society is built very much on relationships. So we run a tight 1-hour meeting that anyone who can read can lead. Those meetings are now, in addition to about 500 groups, local groups, we're now meeting online. Guys from all over the globe are meeting online and making friendships. The meetings are wonderful. It's a safe place to bring your real self and say the real truth. It's a shame-free environment. A lot of healing takes place in meetings. But Samson really lives between the meetings in relationships. And so really the secret sauce to the Samson Society is what we call the Silas relationship, roughly equivalent to the sponsor relationship in a 12-step. So we encourage, what we say is everybody needs a Silas. You need a running buddy. You need somebody who you're talking to every day. It's not as much about accountability as it is about accessibility. It's giving somebody else real-time access to the whole of your life. Not just what you're doing, but what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're doing and what you're thinking of doing on a daily basis. Learning non-sexual intimacy. That's the big challenge for those of us who struggle with sex or porn addiction. But learning how to trust others. We say everybody needs a Silas, anybody can be a Silas, and it's that first step out of isolation and into relationship that winds up paying dividends. For those of us who are married, my wife loves it when I go to a Samson meeting because I come back a better husband. I
There you
come
go.
back, I come back a little more vulnerable, a little better at intimacy. Yeah, so that's Samson. We started in 2004 here in Franklin, Tennessee, and today it's neat to watch it proliferate now around the globe, especially through the online meetings.
So let me ask you this. I think I'd asked you this a while back, but women who struggle with pornography
Yeah,
or addictions in general,
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
As I have launched this podcast series, I don't find very many women who are willing to share that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and our mutual friend David Zaylor had spoken in that at one point, and he was talking about he felt like it was attributed to maybe the fact that women are like, they're like the rock in the household, and
mm-hmm.
there's so much pressure on them to perform that way or to appear that way.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that? It's why, because I know there are women who struggle with addictions. I know there
Yeah.
are, but when I talk about that, I just I don't get a lot of feedback.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I think for women addicted to porn, there is an added level of shame. There is this kind of cultural belief that, in a way, it's kind of natural for a guy to get hooked on porn because,
Right,
right?
right,
Because guys are somehow more sexual than men. Ironically, the fastest growing demographic among the sexually addicted, porn addicted, is female. The pornographers have recognized this opportunity and have funneled millions of dollars into creating pornography aimed directly at women.
mm,
So it has a more relational feel. It's more story driven. It's more intimacy driven. Not to say that all women are wired the same in terms of arousal. They're all, I mean, all of us, we can be conditioned in almost any way, and it depends. I mean, this is a huge subject, but generalizing,
right.
I would say. So anyway, it is a rare day for me when I'm speaking, if I'm speaking to a mixed audience, whether it's at a university or at a church, that when I'm finished, there isn't at least one woman lingering near the platform who wants to talk to me, who opens by saying something like, I know you think that this is a male issue, even if I've said the opposite. But, and then she confides that she's been battling this thing for a very long time. There isn't a lot of hard research on this, but there some indication to believe that perhaps even religious women are a little more vulnerable, mainly because they can't talk about it.
Right.
They have to keep it secret, and anything that you have to keep secret. Meanwhile, the pornographers are very aggressive. Porn is increasingly going mainstream. There are more and more entry doors into it. And once you get sucked in, if you have that vulnerability, anybody, I'm convinced, all of us are potential addicts.
I agree. Absolutely. And because there's not anybody out there who has not experienced trauma,
Right.
emotional pain of some sort on some level.
Right.
And from what I've read and what I've understood, and I have dived into emotional healing and dealing with a son who was recovering from meth addiction. It's typically to cover up pain because we don't know how to articulate what it is we're feeling. It runs so deep, as you've already mentioned. And
I'll tell you,
I can only hope that conversation changes, especially for women.
What concerns me, I'm most concerned for the young women. A few years ago on our Pirate Monk podcast, I had a conversation with Crystal Renault, who at the time was running, they've since changed the name, thank God, but she was running a ministry called Dirty Girls. So it was, she was just a 20-something girl talking about porn addiction. And so during the course of the conversation, I said, Crystal, you talk to the young kids. You're more in touch. I'm already a grandfather. You've got your finger on the pulse. Talk to me about girls. How many girls do you think are looking at porn? And she said, well, what age? Middle school? I said, okay, middle school. She said, 100%. And I about fell through. Now, I have since come to believe that that may not be an exaggeration.
I would agree with you. Yeah.
During those confusing years of adolescence,
Oh, yeah.
when you're trying to come to grips with what it means to be a woman, when you're also trying to understand what it takes to attract a mate, all the boys are looking at porn and are very vocal about it. We talk about it all. Boys talk about it all the time now. If you want to find out what the boys want, they obviously want what's depicted in porn. So so girls have been going to porn now for sex instruction.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think has vastly contributed to the general, I hate to say it, but kind of the slutification of the American girl, where girls are willing to debase themselves and objectify themselves and sacrifice their own dignity in order to get connection.
Right. Because that's what they're really seeking is connection. That's what we're all seeking is connection. Right.
And if that's what it takes, if that's the price I've got to pay, well then, okay.
So be it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a terrible lie that we've all, I know I have, embraced at some point.
And this harms
must be what they want. So,
and this harms the boys as well, because now sex becomes it becomes routine, it becomes expected, it becomes transactional, and it is not intimate.
Right. I would agree with you. Yeah, it's a transaction. Right. It's something that you do. Yeah.
Right.
Just like smoking a cigarette or taking a drink.
Right.
To relieve whatever.
And if there's one thing I know, having spent, sad to say, hundreds of thousands of dollars on commercial sex, having sexual experiences with real and, virtual, more women than I can remember, or care to remember, or could ever count. There is no comparing. I remember one of my first sponsors in 12-step recovery telling me I'd never made love in my life. And I said, what are you talking about? I got 3 kids. He said, oh, you've had sex. Your dog can have sex. You've never made love. And there is no comparing the satisfaction. And the tragedy is, I didn't even taste it until recovery. Couldn't even begin to taste it until recovery. What was I robbed of? And what kind of deep, satisfying, intimate pleasure will young men and women never get to experience because it was robbed from them by a pornographic culture?
Wow. That impacts everything. It impacts us as individuals, as couples, the family unit, you name it. It impacts everything. There's nothing out there that it doesn't impact.
Right.
And we haven't even hit on human trafficking part of it. We won't do that today. But you were talking about, and I know we need to we'll be wrapping it up here in a few minutes. So the importance of men having friends, or anybody actually.
Yeah.
And I see this sadly in my own family, where the men in my family don't have a strong core of male friends.
Right. Yeah.
And how do you help people realize the importance of it? I mean, I guess it's a heart issue, but I just don't know how to help drive that home, that we are better together than by ourselves. What do you
Yeah,
say about
we
that?
we have a culture that values, especially an American culture, that values independence. We also have, many of us, a religious culture that is shame-based. That and shame says that if you see who I really am, you will reject me.
Right.
So I'm going to learn how to be friendly without really having friends. I'm going to tell myself I have friends, and I've got I used to have a Rolodex, and now I have a full phone. I got lots of people who recognize me. I'm well known, but nobody knows me, right?
Right. Right.
But I tell myself that I'm not alone. But my wife knows I'm alone. My wife feels the barrier between us. And in the end, I'm all by myself. At the same time, there is within me a deep longing for connection.
Mm.
At a heart level, on a subconscious level. I know that I'm made because I'm made in the image of God, who himself is a relational being. He's triune, for Pete's sake, always living in personal, in deep connection, that joy of connection, right?
Yeah.
What opens it is when another person brings their real self into my life. It's vulnerability that opens the door. I give the gift of friendship to somebody else when I lead with my weakness rather than my strength.
Mm-hmm.
My telling somebody they need friends isn't going to do it, but my offering friendship in the same way that Jonathan offered friendship to David, by first giving you things you can hurt me with, and then taking off my armor and saying, if you want, I'll walk with you a while.
Right.
Right.
True.
Yeah.
That is such a beautiful definition of true friendship. And I can just say from my own experience these last few years that as I was a member of a story group there at Christ Community when I
Mm-hmm.
lived in Franklin, small intimate group of women who heard my story, knew my story, and there was no shame.
Yeah.
And then I was a part of a retreat, but the ACA meetings where there was that respect.
Yeah.
We shared our stories, and from that, I have some women that I can call on, and I do
Yeah. Yeah.
on a regular basis because it's like, help,
Yeah.
I need a lifeline today. I need
Yeah.
your prayers, and it's and there is just nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are so often in the body of Christ, I think for women especially, we can be really catty towards each other, and we are not willing to lead from weakness. And that is what true leadership looks like, I think,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
is the willingness to be vulnerable and authentic and share our stories. And it is a beautiful thing, and we appreciate your willingness to be a big part of that whole culture and community, Nate. Um, as we close today, before I was on here, I was on that great platform, Facebook, and there was a woman on there talking about how she is, her son gives her they don't allow him to have internet connections on his phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering, and she was criticized for that, of course, and that he's 12.
Yeah.
And so can you speak into that and give some advice?
Yeah.
Because I think, and because she was being shamed that, he's just going to sneak around behind your back, blah, 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 and do it anyway, which
Yeah.
that might be true. But can you speak on that for a moment before we close?
Yeah. I think it's foolish to give any child unfiltered access to the internet. It's also foolish to think that we can forever protect our kids against pornography. So I think it's absolutely essential to have age-appropriate conversations, warning conversations on the front end. Kids need to know that porn exists. Kids need to know that they will see it. Kids need to know that there's going to be a part of them that's going to be attracted to it. by curiosity and for reasons they don't understand. They need not to be shamed for that interest or for that sense of curiosity.
Mhm.
It has to be, you need a relationship with your child that they know that they're not going to incur shame or punishment should they cross the line. They can come and talk about it.
Right.
Thankfully, the technology, the protective technology, is improving. Covenant Eyes particularly took a quantum leap in improving filtering technology within the last couple of years by enlisting artificial intelligence in screen reading technology. So now you can keep your child off the internet, but the internet is no longer the only way that porn can reach a child's device. There are lots of ways, through a thumb drive, through intranets. There are lots of mysterious ways, and kids are ingenious in finding those ways that pornography can reach a screen. But if you have a filter that can read the screen and recognize pornographic imagery, now you've got a much better line of defense. So I highly recommend the new Covenant Eyes stuff. For, let's just say, children of any age, 12 to, in my age, 63. I have a good friend who, back when, porn was in all the hotel rooms. Do you remember that? Some hotels still have that, you can get the adult channel on the TV.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
starting to fade.
Right.
Yeah.
Subscribe to this channel. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a good friend my age who he would get to his room. He would immediately go to the desk and he said, "Could you turn the porn off in my room? There's a child in my room." He would say, "A child?" And he would say, "Yeah, me."
I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I am.
Yeah.
You know,
I hear
I'm
you.
63, but I'm also 53, 43, 33, 23, and very much 13.
13.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I hear you. With all the curiosities and wonders of those teenage years. Yes.
Yeah.
Really quickly, your podcast, you
Uh-huh.
now host with our mutual friend David Hampton, a
Yeah.
podcast. Where can my listeners hear you on your podcast?
Yeah. Just look up the on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, Spotify. Yeah. Just look for the Positive Sobriety Podcast, and you'll find David and me. And I'm also the co-host of the Pirate Monk Podcast. That one's been going.
Oh, okay. Is that just you by yourself, or is that?
No, I do that with Aaron Porter.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's.
Are those weekly podcasts or?
Yeah. Well, it's all volunteer, but right now the Positive Sobriety Podcast has been a little more regular than the Pirate Monk Podcast. But the Pirate Monk Podcast is up over 250 episodes now.
Sweet. I think. Okay. If people want to lasso you in for talk or a retreat or whatever, how do they get in touch with Nate Larkin?
Yeah. I've got a real easy email address. Just hit me at nate@natelarkin.com and I'll be happy to respond.
There you go. Well, Nate, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation and thankful for you and all that you bring to the table.
It's been a great time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've really enjoyed this, and I am thankful for you and your story, and for Allie and your friendship over these past few years. And thank you so much.
All right.
And before I close, I always like to say thank you to my sponsor, Jeff Duke, who is of Duke Legal here in St. Louis. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in for our episode of Healing Moments with Martha, and we will see you next week as I interview Jay Westbrook. Thank you again.